Start. Oh, there it goes.
There we go.
So okay, we're good.
You want to dim it?
All right. No, I think we're good. All right, hit the white button. Welcome to Down the Dark Garden Path. It's our weekly gardening and landscape show brought to you by Greenscapes Landscape Company. I'm your host, Bill Gerhardt. I'm the owner of Greenscapes and have been landscaping in Columbus for about 41 years. This morning, I have a friend here who is a third-generation nurseryman who's been very instrumental in developing many of the new plants you see in the garden centers. My guest is Brian Decker of Decker Nursery. Good morning, Brian.
Morning, Bill.
You know, before we start to talk about some of the plants and the way the plants come to market, I want to know a little bit about you and the third-generation nursery deal and how you got started in this whole plant business.
Okay. Well, my grandfather, who was from Holland, was over there as a professional trained horticulturalist. As a matter of fact, he was one of the royal gardeners for Kaiser Wilhelm.
Wow,
and
that's something.
Yeah, and right after World War I, the horticultural industry in Holland was pretty devastated by the war, and many of the good horticulturalists over there sought an opportunity to immigrate to the United States.
You've done World War I.
World War I. So in 1921, Paul Offenberg and his wife came to the United States and were able to acquire a little bit of funding and such, and bought some property at the corner of Nelson and Livingston Avenue and started the Paul Offenberg Nursery Company in 1921. It eventually relocated to Barnett and Livingston Avenue and around 1946 after World War II, and then eventually went through some transition, and we're now in the Groveport Canal Winchester area on Rager Road, and so we've had our third transition and also a corporate name change along the way.
Right. I think some people remember the old Offenberg Nursery there, the edge of Bexley, Whitehall area.
We used to be in the landscape business on a small, more of just a planting type of situation, and it wasn't really nearly the sophistication it is today. And we did a lot of work in the Pickerington and the Bexley and the Berwick area and the Arlington area, and had some customers who were with us for years and years and years. So
I think we've torn out some of those old jobs at Greenscapes because the plant material has changed over the years. But you were talking on the way here about how your father got into the landscape nursery business. I thought that was kind of fascinating.
My father, Bernard Decker, had met my mother, Mary Betty Offenberg, and went off to World War II and got to fly around in B-17s as a radio operator and sideways gunner. He was lucky enough to survive that. Came back to the United States, got into the ornamental steel business for a year or two, and then my grandfather asked him to come join the family nursery business. He did. My grandfather had a stroke after about a year, and my father, without any college or professional horticultural training, found himself running a nursery business.
He was instantly promoted
after
20-some years. He's 20-some years old.
After a year of experience, and they were in the landscape business and the propagation business and a lot of things that way. So he did that. Eventually, I was the last of 4 children. I went ahead and attended Ohio State University and got a degree in ornamental horticulture, and took every elective I could in the School of Business, and we joined the company, and here I am today. After I started at age 8, and I have now had 52 seasons of working in the nursery business, in the wholesale nursery.
At age 8, I imagine you were pulling a lot of weeds.
I was pulling a lot of weeds.
I think you were on rabbit patrol too,
taking
weren't you?
the bindings off of grafts and making 50 cents an hour and making $10 a week.
Well, you know, and I remember when you guys moved out to the Groveport location, because I just moved to our location. It was about 1981, and I remember I was working on the roof of my old house. It was built in 1837. And, you know, I just bought it, needed a lot of work, and I see this tractor coming down Winchester Pike with a guy with white hair.
That was my father.
Your dad was very distinctive.
Yes.
He was about, what, 6'4"?
He was 6'3", 3. And
I saw this guy coming down that road, and I knew instantly that was what we call Bernie Decker.
Yep, he had a Hollywood head of gray hair, and he was driving that old Farmall Cub cultivating tractor from the Offenburg nursery location to the new location in Groveport Canal, Winchester.
We both stared at each other, and we finally figured. I think he probably recognized me, didn't know who I was. I knew who he was. I'm up on my roof, I'm waving at him.
We were not funded well enough to have a trailer to actually drive the tractor onto, so the easiest way to get it from A to B was to simply drive it down the road.
So Brian, it used to be that nurserymen would go out and scour their fields and look for plants that were different, or they would go on trips to find new plants that were maybe a mutation than what they would expect, and then they would go and propagate off of that cutting or that seed or whatever. And how's that changed, I guess?
I've been fortunate enough to witness a unbelievable change in direction of horticulture and how new plants are introduced to the trade and the processes they go through. In the old days, it literally was, if you found something new and different, you began to propagate it. You did not patent it. You did not trademark the name or anything. And oftentimes you didn't do a whole lot of trialing and testing. It might have had a variegated foliage or something that was different. You normally named it after your Aunt Bobby or your nursery or something like this or something.
Yeah.
And it had, the names of plants had nothing whatsoever to do to assist the retail public in having any clue as to what they were. So I've witnessed that, and eventually plant breeding started to get hold, and people in the industry and the academic world began to understand the processes. So we've gone from sort of the Wild West of new plant introduction to where you would have a new taxus that would be called Taxus media Kobeli, after a nursery in Coshocton called Kobel's Nursery, to where you actually have plants nowadays that have beautiful names that are descriptive and are very, very beneficial on the marketing side. And then,
like you were talking about the Snow Fountain Cherry.
That's a wonderful story. If people are familiar with the wonderful white Snow Fountain Cherry, that plant was available in the nursery industry for years, and it was introduced by a company called Wayside Gardens, which sold both mail order and wholesale. And they had a beautiful cherry, and its name was Wayside White Weeper. Well, that didn't really do a whole lot.
It didn't sell a whole lot of French fries, did it?
No, it didn't. And a company called Lake County Nursery that was headed by Jim Zampini, who passed away recently, was able to take that plant and trademark a new name for that plant called Snow Fountain Cherry. And that plant since then exploded in demand, and because the name helped tell the story of what the plant did.
And it's a good plant.
It's a great plant.
It's one of those plants that lived up to the name and the hype.
But you needed to take great plants and mix them with a little bit of marketing to go ahead and actually begin to launch that. And since that time, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Snow Fountain cherries and the fees associated with that trademark name have been done. And then those fees not only provide an opportunity for an income stream for the nursery, but if they're smart, they're going to use part of that funding to also help with marketing.
So Decker Nursery, you're a leader in this whole, I guess, game of introducing new plants. And I remember when went out there years and years ago, you guys were grafting plants. You were taking, juniper, signwood, and the rootstock of another juniper, and then different spruce and all that. Do you still do that?
Yes. What happened is that eventually we realized that there were a lot better landscapers like you, Bill, than us, and we
you will admit that.
And we got out of the landscape business because we wanted to focus on what we really did best, and that was plant propagation. And that was both in the roots of our Dutch heritage and the grafting of woody ornamentals, and also in the rooting of cuttings and such. And eventually we expanded and expanded and expanded our capacity to where we have become a internationally known center for innovative plant propagation. And we are a place that people who are breeders or plant licensee people would come to and say, you're one of these rooting stations or grafting stations type of places that's within the majority of the population of the United States, and we want to align with you. And we begin to produce these plants under license because most plants nowadays that are good new plants have been, a lot of effort has gone into the development of these plants.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to fund that process, they are either patented or copyrighted on the name or both.
Right.
And that protects the plant and provides a funding stream back that can be used in many different ways. A wonderful story of this is Invincible Spirit Hydrangea that's part of the Proven Winners collection. That's where, along with all the hydrangeas that have been produced, they made Proven Winners, and Spring Meadow Nursery out of Grand Haven, Michigan, made a commitment early on that all the royalty profits from that plant, which was an incredibly beautiful pink blooming hydrangea, would donate to the Breast Cancer Research Fund. And that particular plant, because it was a good plant, is very popular and properly marketed, and has been like a lot of pink days they have at garden centers to celebrate that plant, has funded hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars into the breast cancer research thing through the royalties that are associated with the sale of that plant.
I remember when I started this business in 77, I'd go to the nursery and I'd, of course, pick out the plants, but you get back in those nurseries and they'd have usually a couple of old German guys or Dutch guys who were back there rooting and grafting things, and they had various levels of success. But as those guys have retired and gone away, most of those nurseries, they don't do that in-house, so they turn to companies like yours that do it really nationally and internationally. So you ship these, what they're starter plants really, all over the world.
We go ahead and do the hard part, I call it. We're the science of horticulture on the initial stage to provide plants that are either grafted, which is a surgical process of joining the sign of the cultivar plant,
which is the top,
onto a root system or rootstock. We also do rooted cuttings that by doing that you're producing plants that are genetic clones. It's an asexual type of plant reproduction, so you're able to say that if we're making limelight hydrangea or some plant like that, and we produce 50,000 of them, we can pretty much be sure that every single plant is a genetic identical copy to the other ones. So we have taken the skills we had, which used to be sort of well known through many, many, many small companies, and through attrition over the years and the loss of those skill sets, we have chosen to grow those skill sets and as a result become a kind of a center for that plant propagation. And there's hardly a nursery this side of the Rocky Mountains or down to the Gulf Coast or the Eastern Shores that's a sizable wholesale nursery that is not likely a customer of ours. And we're shipping to 40 states or 44 states, I don't really recall, in Canada, and we are internationally known for our innovation in plant propagation and our techniques that way.
So just so people understand, and I find it fascinating because when I go to your nursery, it used to be I would go there and get a lot of my landscape materials and trees and stuff like that. And of course we still do, but your nursery is primarily about propagating young plants that are sold in small sizes.
Right. To other wholesale nurseries.
Wholesale nurseries. And you'll show me a whole table full of plants that
small plants that are in pots that are similar to where you would buy your little quart type annuals in the spring or vegetable plants from a garden center. And we produce these plants in vast numbers. Right. And we grow them and trim them and get a good starter plant going and ready to go and use those skills to do that. And then we load them up onto multi-level pallets, which would go out across the country and go to other wholesale nurseries where they will then go and take these plants after they've paid, they would pay us the royalty fees and such involved that we would eventually forward on to the license owners on those plants. And then they will grow.
Looking around.
I lost my train of thought there. I'm sorry.
We might have to go back and cut that, but we're talking about potted plants.
Oh yeah,
Okay. Hit the timer again. I'll start it off. So yeah, so in other words, you have all these plants that you've raised from either a graft or a cutting or and they're clones, so they're identical, and you're shipping them across the whole country.
Right.
You said 44 states and up into Canada.
Right. So when they would go into other wholesale nurseries, and they would either pot them up or plant them out into the field. If they were a grafted blue spruce or a weeping white pine or a hydrangea or something of that nature. And then they would grow them up to suit their market, whether their market was retail garden centers or mass merchant stores like a Home Depot or a Lowe's, or a landscape contractor like Greenscapes, and or a wholesale yard, which is also a intermediary that people like you get plant material for landscape jobs.
We're going to talk more about some of the plants that you grow in the next segment. I want to go into specifics because I think it would be interesting for our homeowners to know, hey, what are some really good plant material that has started at Decker Nursery, and maybe stuff that will work in their homes. So you're listening to Greenscapes Down the Garden Path. We'll be right back.
Sorry, boys. If it's going to be on Facebook Live, I believe the phone active.
Oh, that's fine. Who's Heather Rice?
I know.
Who's Heather Rice, man?
She's from Lamar Outdoor. She could be watching the show now.
Hi, Heather. She must not be.
That's the thing is when someone's watching us do it, sometimes they'll call like, I'm watching you. And I'm like, don't call while we're doing this. Like, we're not going to take your call.
That's funny. I better watch it still live, isn't it?
Yeah. What's your P's and Q's, boys?
Yeah, that's right. He'll record us. Okay. All right. Well, second session, we'll just go back into that whole discussion if you want to go into the plants and stuff like that. We'll go to
and remember,
26 minutes, you think?
26, 27.
Okay.
We're actually not doing the genetic breeding that's doing these.
Correct.
We're a licensed propagator, so we want to, I don't want to set the tone that like we're developing all the new plant materials.
Okay. All right. Yep. Welcome back to Down the Garden Path. It's our landscape show about landscaping in your home. So I've got Brian Decker here today from Decker Nursery. I'm Bill Gerhardt. And in this segment, we're going to talk about some of the new plants that have come through Decker Nursery that you think highly of and that you think homeowners should know about.
Right.
So, one of my nemesis, I guess, at Greenscapes are the hydrangeas. Because there's so darn many of them, and we've had some that were good, and some were not so good. So tell me about hydrangeas.
Well,
put you on the spot here, Brian.
No. This is a perfect example of how things are getting better and better every moment. There's many different kinds of hydrangeas. The most common that people will think about are the macrophylla, or the big leaf hydrangeas. Mm-hmm. Now, in the old days, when I was younger in my career, all we had were a few varieties around here like Nico Blue or something like that.
Right.
And they never flowered in Columbus, Ohio, because all their flower buds, which are down at the base of the crown of the plants, would freeze off during the wintertime. And so it would send a new flush of growth up the next year, set new flower buds, and then the next winter those would be killed too, and you'd never get any flower.
Right.
Eventually people began to breed and develop new cultivars. I'm sure a lot of people remember Endless Summer Hydrangea that originated out of Bailey Nursery. That's an example of one that has been moderately successful in central Ohio, but can still be damaged in old cold winters. However, it does bloom on new growth, so you would get some flowers, but not the flower set that people were maybe looking for. And it's been a gradual evolution on the hydrangeas, that what we've been trying to do as an industry is breed more cold hardiness into the flower buds, which are the side axillary buds down near the crown of the plant. If you were to dig down in there and move the leaves aside and look at down in there, and breed more cold hardiness. So like what they're doing now in the plant breeding on hydrangeas, as they're moving further and further down into new generations of these, is they're taking a type of more cold hardy plant called Hydrangea serrata, or mountain hydrangea, and they're breeding in some of the genetic characteristics from that plant to provide more cold hardiness to the buds, so that even when we get a cold winter in central Ohio, you're going to get the original first flush of flowers, and then you'll get the reblooming that you're used to now. Mm-hmm. But in your case, a lot of customers have gone out there in the fall of the year, And they say, well, look at all those leaves that are getting caught in that plant in the fall. So what do? They go in there and they cut them down.
Yep.
And then they cut off the flower buds that are there. And then they wonder when the spring they get a flush of vegetative growth, but they don't get flowers on the end of it right away. And that's because the plant has to, in essence, reset the clock.
Correct.
So that's what's happening. So what we're trying to do is allow for those things in the future to breed in characteristics in the plant breeding that is accomplishing that. Another fantastic facet of the plant breeding that's going on nowadays is we've really combined some of the science of the academics, professors out there that are real true experts in plant genetics with the plant trade and trying to develop plants that are what are called triploid in many cases.
Mm-hmm.
What a triploid plant is has 3 sets of chromosomes. Now, triploid plants...
So it's a Frankenstein plant.
A little bit. But what they do is they breed 2 plants together that will end up with 3 sets of chromosomes rather than the normal 2. And what several things happen. First off, in triploid plants, they tend to have larger flowers, larger leaves, a little bit more of the characteristics we're looking for in plants.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the greatest benefits of those is that they may flower, but they will not form seed because they genetically just cannot fertilize that seed.
Right.
So what you have is a plant that is generally often completely sterile and has 0 chance of ever developing any kind of invasive plant characteristics. And at the same time, what happens with the plant is it goes ahead and doesn't put energy into the seed. Therefore, it reflowers because it thinks it has to continue to do its job. So you get a lot of reblooming.
So fall is for planting, and the reason being is because it's cooler weather. And I think the plant material there's a better availability too. But we always talk about fall is for planting, and now it's the fall time. It's perfect, and we've had some cooler weather coming on. So what are some of your favorite, 4 or 5 of your favorite hydrangeas that you've seen through your plant breeding and activities here?
Well,
and why, I guess, too.
Well, in the arborescens or the smooth hydrangea family, that is where you see in a lot of these hydrangeas around that are oftentimes white blooming hydrangeas in the latter part of the summer that have such a dramatic effect.
Right.
Some of the more common known ones are that have been around for a while are limelight and Annabelle is an old one.
Right.
Now what we're doing is they're developing new varieties of smooth hydrangea that are going to have flowers like Incrediball that is twice the size of Annabelle's. Mm-hmm. And also we are breeding in stronger stems so that when you get a heavy rainstorm, your hydrangea may not crash because of the weight of the water on the plants. So I'm a big fan of Incrediball. There's a pink version of that now called Incrediball Blush that I've had at my home, and I love it. Invincible Spirit, which I mentioned earlier, is now coming out with Invincible Spirit 2 and Invincible Ruby, both of which not only are vast improvements on the plant.
I've seen the Ruby. That's really
but they also are sending the royalty payments on that back into breast cancer research.
That's really cool.
Hydrangea Bobo I've had at my house, and it's a very, very short, compact 24 to 30 inch type version of a limelight hydrangea. That everything is just downsized.
So it starts green and goes to white. The flowers kind of that.
Yeah, it comes out a little green and immediately goes to white, but it's so florific on that small plant that everything's just downsized. So when you've got a small little patio area in a condo or something like this and you want the hydrangeas, but you just don't have a lot of room, Bobo's just a fantastic
Here's the name I like, Pinky Winky.
Yeah, that's one that you get a lot of these that also will come out one color like white and then go to a pink. Hydrangea Quickfire is one of those that you remarked on it when you were at my home recently, and and it is a beautiful flower that starts white and then goes to a nice pink this time of year, and then eventually it'll dry to a brown, which makes a wonderful cut flower for around the holidays to bring inside. So in the smooth hydrangea, that would be where we are there. When you get into the macrophylla types, the Endless Summer series, which I mentioned, which originated out of Minneapolis at Bailey Nursery, has done incredible breeding with an internationally known plantsman by the name of Dr. Michael Durr. And he has headed the project up to develop hydrangeas there that are called Bloomstruck, Blushing Bride, and Twist and Shout. And they're a whole new generation past the original Endless Summer.
Yep.
Now they're part of the Endless Summer series, but it's just sort of moving on to the next level.
Yep. When you prune the microphylla different than you do the smooths.
Right.
Yep.
The best thing you can do with microphyllas is to go ahead and just leave them alone in the fall if you can.
Yep.
Let the winter take its course. In the spring, start to see where buds are breaking and trim away any dead twigs above that point. Let them go. They're like ornamental grasses, budliers. Some plants and ornamental roses do much, much better if you can let those plants go in the fall and not trim them and allow the natural carbohydrate levels to restore and allow those buds to go back to normal.
And then if you have to, in the spring, if some of that material doesn't regrow, you can cut it then. You don't need to cut everything
You don't
back
need
in
to
the
cut
fall.
it in the fall. It's just sometimes handier.
You're right, with roses and hydrangeas, some of that I would recommend maybe not doing such aggressive pruning. That's for sure. And there's other, there's like the oak leaf hydrangeas I personally love. Now, they get big, a lot of them. You do have some dwarfer cultivars.
Not necessarily anymore getting big. That Munchkin series is out of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and they had Munchkin and Ruby Slippers, which are names that came from the Wizard of Oz.
Okay.
And Munchkin is a very, very compact 20-year-old oak leaf hydrangea that is 30 inches tall.
That's pretty cool. I've not seen that one.
Yes, well, it's
so
so hard to propagate. Yeah, I've got them, but it's so hard to propagate because it grows so slow that getting cutting wood can be difficult. Ruby Slippers is pretty cool because it blooms white like oak leaf does, but then turns to pink, which is unusual in the oak leaf species.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time this week. I'm going to have you back next week. We're going to talk more about these plants and what you do with plant breeding and how plants come to market. I think it's fascinating. And we're going to put this list of plant materials on the Greenscapes website, and you can see that at greenscapes.net. If you have more questions or you want to talk to one of our designers, you can call us at 614-837-1869. We'll be back next week with more on Down the Garden Path.